you're such a wealth of knowledge, and you really you're teaching me to really, when I read the Bible, to break it down to the words, what it actually says. But you said something interesting to me the other day, and that was all sinners are going to heaven and all good people are not. And I don't know what you meant by that statement, but you blew my mind. And I told you to hold every thought, and maybe I heard you wrong, but say it again.
Well, that's a little different than how I communicated. We have this idea in America today that good people go to heaven. If you ask the average American, the majority of Americans believe that good people go to heaven. That's just, oh, they were a good person, they definitely went to heaven. They were good, they definitely went to heaven. That is a myth. It's a lie. Now, the reason we like to believe this thought that good people go to heaven is because it makes sense, and we believe that we make the cut because we believe we're good people. We believe we're good people, especially compared to those people, right? We all have somebody in our life we know we're better than. And so we just automatically assume we're good people. The problem is there's no definition for what good is. In history, in culture, in religion, like, think about it. What we believe was good and bad 1,000 years ago is very different than today. Culturally, what we believe is good and bad is different. There are cultures in the world who believe there are things that are good and they're actually doing the will of God that we believe as Americans are absolutely evil and horrible. So there's no standard.
I believe a lot of things have gone really bad lately.
Yeah. Well, there is no unified standard anywhere to discover what is good. Like what is good? So if it's good enough to go to heaven, what does that mean? Is that like baseball, where if I can bat 300, which is actually 30%, I'm good enough to go to heaven? Is it a majority? Do I have to hit 51%? Is it like school, where I have to hit 70%? Do my thoughts count? Or is it just my actions and deeds? There's no logical reasoning for what is good enough to go to heaven. Now, what some people will do is say, well, the Bible tells us what is good and what is evil, what is right, what is wrong. As a pastor, let me tell you, if you want to use the Bible to figure out what is good enough to go to heaven, that's a terrible idea. Because if you use the Bible to figure out what is good enough to go to heaven, what you're going to discover right away is you're not good enough. You don't make the cut. You see, Jesus, he comes along in the New Testament, and this is mind-blowing. Jesus comes in the New Testament because there's all these people following the Old Testament law, thinking that they're good enough because they're not breaking any commands. Jesus raised the standard so high that the very best people in the world were no longer good enough.
So let's get this straight. He didn't change the commandments.
He made them harder. Yeah, because what Jesus said is like, look, you've heard it said, don't commit a murder. I'm telling you right now, if you've even had the thought of anger towards a person in your mind, you've committed that sin. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I'm telling you, if you even look at a woman lustfully, you have committed that sin. Jesus raised the standard.
Oh my God, I've committed.
So now that the best people in the world are no longer good enough. So here's what Jesus taught. Jesus did not teach us that good people go to heaven. Jesus did not teach that. Jesus taught us that there are bad people who will make it into heaven, and there are good people who are not good enough to get into heaven. That's what Jesus taught. There's a thief on the cross, right? This guy doesn't have time to get water baptized, doesn't have time to do anything good to pay for all the bad things he's done. And Jesus looks at this guy and says, today you will be with me in paradise. This is a bad dude. He's a criminal. He's on a cross for committing crimes. He has no opportunity to turn his life around. He's about to die. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. So here's what Jesus taught. Jesus did not teach good people go to heaven. Jesus taught forgiven people go to heaven. Because none of us will ever be good enough. There was only one good person, and that was Jesus. That was
I always tell people it's the man on the middle cross told us we can.
Yeah. That's
come to his home. Yeah. It's pretty much that. But you know, that's kind of, it gets confusing because I'm still scratching my head here a little bit, because last night for instance, I just happen to turn on the news just to quickly see what's going on, and you see all these people crying death to Jews, and out on Columbia University, and the police are moving in, and there's people swearing, putting their fingers up, saying that they're, I mean, the stuff that they're yelling is just, it's worse than murder. Like you said, just even saying the words in Jesus's eyes is you've committed that murder already. And they're speaking of committing more genocide. How do these people, are they going to get to heaven, or what? This is where my confusion is how does this all work? Because they think they believe in God too. Maybe not Jesus. I don't know what they believe in, but they're thinking their God is going to raise them up. We're thinking our God is going to raise us up. And, these people should be eliminated, not these people, not. But you're saying our God is going to invite, our Jesus is going to invite everybody. Help me understand.
Everybody that receives the gift, the free gift of grace, will make it to heaven. Jesus was talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Nicodemus was a good-hearted Jewish man who loved God with all of his heart, tried to serve God with all of his heart, and was really doing his best. And he was a very, very good man.
Was he a Pharisee?
He was, but he was a good Pharisee. Pharisees weren't all evil. Most of the Pharisees were very good people who loved God, who wanted to follow God, and who were doing their best to serve God. And that was Nicodemus. And Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and he asks the question in John chapter 3, how do I get to heaven? How do I be made right with God? And Jesus doesn't say, you've got to behave again. Like, it's all about your behavior. It's all about you following the rules and following the law and doing all the... No, he said, you got to be born again. You've got to be born again. You see, when we're born into a family, it has nothing to do with our behavior. When my son was born, I didn't put him on probation for 5 years before I gave him our last name. I didn't say, look, I need to know how this works out. I got to make sure you don't end up in jail. You don't end up on drugs. You make it through college. Before you get our last name, the Jayne family name, I need to know that you deserve it. I need to know that you've earned it, that you're worth it. No, he got my last name the day he was born. And can I be very honest? When my son was born, his behavior, like, he was the most selfish human being I have ever met when he was born. Like, all he thought about was himself. He would just cry, and he wanted to be held, and he wanted his diaper changed, and he wanted to be fed. Do you realize when my son was born, he never asked me one time how my day was? He never asked to help around the house. No, his behavior was terrible. Like, he was the most selfish human being. It was all about him when he was born, and yet we loved him. And we gave him our last name, and he was part of our family. It had nothing to do with his behavior. It had everything to do with who his father was. You see, what a Christian is not somebody who does good. A Christian is not somebody who behaves. A Christian is not somebody who follows the rule. A Christian is somebody who is born by grace into the family of God, something we do not deserve. Now, I do my best to follow God and love people and help people, not to be a Christian, but because I'm already a Christian. Because what Jesus taught over and over again, because here's what religion, Jesus was always against religion, always against religion. Jesus, let me put it like this. Does it irritate you in America today that so-called quote-unquote Christians who claim to be right about God and claim to be right with God mistreat and devalue people?
Oh my goodness. You see it happen all the time. I mean, now that they've become a Christian, you're evil, you're the devil, and you don't come near me.
And Jesus...
And don't come to my church.
That irritated Jesus. He was furious by it. Jesus's whole ministry is like, you cannot claim to be right with God and mistreat and devalue people the Father loves. And God loves everyone. God loves every person in the world. And Jesus over and over and over said, you cannot be right with my Father and mistreat people my Father loves. Because my Father loves people.
Okay, so what you're basically saying, let me see if I'm understanding this, is it's not about I mean, it helps to do good deeds. It helps to help other people. It helps to, follow the commandments. I mean, let's give that. We're not saying that you got to be a sinner and then at the last minute you're in if you say please. I mean, there's got to be some good, but we're all sinners. But
well, the question that Jesus asks that we all have to answer is, have you ever mistreated another person?
Well, we all have, I think.
100%.
I don't think there's not one person 100%. That has a mystery, even in the thought.
So according to Jesus, we're all sinners, and we all fall short of the glory of God, and none of us will ever, in our entire life, be good enough for God. None of us will ever be good enough for God. So how do we?
So that's what you mean about even people of sin will get into heaven, because no one will ever be without sin. That's what you're really saying. You're not saying that if you're going
none of us are perfect.
And you're intentionally, hurting people and really committing some bad stuff. It's not like the door is going to be wide open for you. You have to, how do you say, give yourself to God, believe in the one Father, believe in his Son.
But here's where the confusion comes. You don't clean yourself up to come to God.
Explain.
You come to God broken, dirty, filthy, and you let God clean you up. A lot of people think, well, I can't go to God. I need to clean up my act.
Before or after? You're talking why we're still here?
I'm talking about before. I'm talking about before.
Why we're still here on earth?
No, I'm talking about before the moment we give our life to Christ. Before the moment on earth we give our life to Christ, give our life to God. A lot of people think, well, I can't go to church. I got to clean myself up. Or I can't come to God right now. I need to clean up my act. I need to clean up my behavior. I'm doing too many bad things for God to accept me, not realizing it's God that cleans you up, not you. Like I don't take a shower before I take a bath. It's like, at the end of the day, we come to God broken as sinners in whatever condition, and God accepts us as we are. God does not demand you to do anything to come to him other than say yes, other than come to him. You look at the story of the prodigal son who goes away from God or goes away from the father, and he abuses the father, takes the father's stuff, wastes it all. And he's coming back to the father, and he's rehearsing this speech. Dad, just let me be a servant in your house. I'm not worthy to be called your son anymore. I don't deserve to be a son. I don't deserve to be part of the family. Just let me be a servant in the home. And he's rehearsing this speech. He gets to the father, and what does the father do? Like, he starts going into the speech, and the father interrupts, and he says, stop. You're my son. Bring the robe. Bring the ring. Bring the shoes. I don't want anyone in this entire town to look at you as anything other than my son. Period. I don't care what you've done. I don't care where you've been. You are my son. And that's the heart of God. We don't clean ourselves up to come to God.
Because I've had this debate with a couple people, not a debate, but discussion, where they were like, wait a minute, that is so unfair, because they didn't get it. The metaphor to it as well is like, you can come to God as long as you come back home. It doesn't matter when. But they were like, but that's unfair, because his other son served him every day, every year of his life. He did everything for his father, while the other son went out and blew all the money, did all the partying, probably been with every woman in the village, and committed sin left and right. And yet this child, who was faithful to his father, turned around and forgave the son who totally ruined and did everything of the opposite, and said, don't worry, you serve him. He told his other son, who was good, you serve him.
Well,
and get him cleaned up. So
the key to the story is, who is the crowd that he was speaking. See, the story of the prodigal is not about the younger brother.
Right.
The whole story is about the older brother.
But you see where people get a little upset, because they're like, this kid, he's done so well to his father, yet this one comes along.
He hasn't done well.
The last comes first, right?
He hasn't done well, though. That's the thing. Both sons are lost. One's lost in all of his bad deeds. One's lost in all of his good deeds. They're both lost. One's lost in the bad things he's doing. One's lost in the... He was doing good to manipulate the father. He wasn't doing good because he loved the father. He was doing good to manipulate the father. Many people who do good things are doing it with the wrong motives. Jesus was talking to Pharisees and religious people who were doing all the right things for the wrong reasons. They were doing good things to manipulate God. So the story is about the older brother. Now, in true Jewish culture, a good older brother would have gone to the father and said, Dad, I'll go find my younger brother. And whatever it costs me, whatever it takes, I will find my younger brother and I will bring him home, because I know how much you love him and I know how much your heart is hurting. And so I will go find my younger brother and I'll bring my brother home and I'll bring him back to you. And it doesn't matter what it costs me. Now, in the story, Jesus paints a picture of an ugly older brother.
I get it.
An ugly older brother who did not. And the reason
he probably was praying that his brother wouldn't come home, because then he would be left everything. So for selfish reasons,
but
he didn't go look for him, so he would inherit everything.
Yes, but in contrast, I want you to think about, he already had everything, by the way. The father already divided the property, so the older brother owned everything. He already owned everything. Jesus did that in contrast. Why? Because, Giulio, you and I, we have an older brother that went to the father. And he said, Dad, whatever I have to do, whatever it costs me, if I have to hang on a cross, and if I have to shed my blood, I will go and I will bring my little brothers and my little sisters home to you. You see, we have the older brother, the good older brother. It makes me cry thinking about it, because we have the good older brother.
You have a great older brother.
That came to earth, that paid the ultimate price so that you and I could be brought home, so that we could have access to the Father, so that we could come to the Father. He paid for all of our sin, because I'm not good enough. So I needed somebody to save me, because I could not save myself. I could not do enough good deeds to save me. I needed somebody to save me, and that's what Jesus does. He comes to earth, takes all, and it's not fair. Our God is not fair. And I thank God he's not fair. Because if God was fair, if God gave me what I deserved, I'd be in hell forever. If I got what I deserve for my life, if I got what I deserve for all the things I've done, I thank God he's not fair. I thank God he doesn't treat me the way I deserve.
I think you and I would be sharing a room down there.
Exactly. But he's not fair. He's not fair. He doesn't give us what we deserve. He gives us grace. Grace is God giving you what you do not deserve. Mercy is not giving you what you do deserve. I deserve punishment for my life. God gave me mercy, and instead of punishing me, he punished Jesus. Jesus took all the punishment for me on the cross. I don't deserve any good thing in my life for the life that I've lived, yet God gives me grace, and he treats me and gives me what Jesus deserves. That's grace. Grace is when you get what you don't deserve. Mercy is when you don't get what you do deserve. God gives us grace and mercy, because here's the gospel message. If you ever want to know what the gospel message is, God treated Jesus. Think about this. God treated Jesus the way you and I deserve to be treated, so that God can treat us the way Jesus deserves to be treated. So the point is, good people don't go to heaven because there was only one good person, and his name was Jesus. Forgiven people go to heaven. People that have come to Jesus and said, forgive me. Forgive me.
The key word, forgiven people.
And when I become forgiven, all of a sudden God grades me with Jesus's life. So Jesus's life was perfect. All of a sudden that perfect grade is put on top of me. God doesn't look at me for my actions. God looks at me according to Jesus's actions. That's what being a Christian is. A Christian is not somebody who does the right things. A Christian is somebody who believes the right things. There's a radical difference.
Well, you know, he did, knowing that he was going to be crucified, because it was written, it was done, that he had to, he could have hid and not come back to meet the crucifixion and die for our sins. But he knew that was going to happen, correct? So he came back. Am I right, or am I reading this wrong?
No, he came because he knew we could not pay for our own sin. And he knew that the wages of sin is death. Romans tells us the wages of sin is death. Every sin I've ever committed deserves death, deserves punishment, deserves hell. God loved us so much, he could not bear the thought of us paying for our own sins because he did not want to be separated from us. So what God did is he sent his son to be our sacrifice, to take all the punishment and payment for our sin. So imagine you owe $1,000 to the bank. Like you owe $1,000.
I do.
And God shows up, or you have a friend that shows up and goes to the bank and says, how much does Giulio owe you? And they say, well, he owes us $1,000. And he says, here's $1 million check. I want to pay for his debt. Well, that's too much, right? But that's what Jesus was. He was an overpayment for your life. It's like you owed $1,000 and God paid the bank $1 million. And now the bank loves you because they were paid so much more than what you owed. And that's what Jesus was.
I wish he was still around so he could pay some of those debts I have.